up guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm back with another tutorial for you on how I made my spinning pizza chakram for my cosplay of Pizza Delivery Sivir from League of Legends. Before we get started, I wanted to let you guys know that I've taken a really big step in my cosplay career and started a Patreon. The Patreon rewards are focused on providing more insight and tips on building cosplay, behind the scenes footage of my cosplay contest builds, and you can even get full access to my digital cosplay sketchbook, which includes scans of my notes, sketches, building process, brainstorming, everything that I kind of scribble down while I'm working on a cosplay. All of the details will be in the link in the description down below, so I would really appreciate you going and checking that out if you're into it. I do want you to know that I will never put beginner information behind a paywall. Part of having my platform on social media with cosplay is to help other cosplayers, especially newbie cosplayers, get into the hobby and kind of figure out what they're doing and helping them. But if you do want to support me in an easy way that also benefits you as a cosplayer, check that link to Patreon below. And if you're not into that kind of stuff, I totally get it. If you want to support me in a totally free way, interacting with this video is a great way to do that with likes, comments, and shares. Okay, enough of that. Let's build this pizza.
There wasn't much of a patterning step for this prop. I mostly just figured out the size I wanted and went from there. So with not much to pattern, I was just working with circles. The pizza itself is 26 inches in diameter. The tray base is 28 inches in diameter. And there's a piece of wood attached to the underside of the pizza as well, which is hidden, and it is 20 inches in diameter. Starting with the pizza itself, I am working mostly with Eva foam floor mats, which are the cheap ones you can get in the hardware store. I paid about $10 for a pack of 8 of these. I put together 4 of the foam floor mats, and I marked straight lines through the puzzle pieces to help line them up and measure everything evenly. I also numbered my mats to stay well organized. I used spray adhesive to connect my puzzle piece mat things together because contact cement would have been a bit too messy for this, and I didn't want it to get too complicated. This part of the project was fine to get messy with spray adhesive because it would be covered up anyway, so spray adhesive was an easy and effective choice, but anytime you need to be precise with your glue on foam, go for contact cement. With the spray adhesive tacky, I placed the pieces together very carefully. I chose to cut my foam after piecing the foam together because it would ensure that my pizza could be perfectly circular, rather than trying to put together exact shapes after gluing the mats together. I use a tape measure pinned in place to mark a circle on my foam pieces. I cut out the circle using the knife attachment on my wood burning tool, which I definitely recommend getting a wood burning tool if you'll be cutting a lot of foam. Most of the time, I'll use this outside, particularly if I'm creating texture using the various tips, but just cutting out foam does not usually create fumes, and it's very fast, so I'll usually just turn on a fan when I do some simple cutting like this. Next, I cut the crust, which if I would have had a little better foresight, it would have been a better idea to mark the crust while I was marking the pizza and before the foam was cut. But that's alright. I measured 1.5 inches around the outside edge of my circle, and I cut that out as well. I did this step twice to create foam that would serve as a nice thick crust. Obviously, the crust circle was bigger than the actual pizza, so I cut a section off so that I'd be able to fit it smaller to match the pizza dough base. I normally avoid using these foam mats because I hate working around the diamond print on the back, but with this being a more budget-friendly cosplay for me, I saved money by instead spending time. I dremeled the print down as smooth as I could so it would lay flat on my base pizza. This is a pretty annoying task, but I've heard that if you have or can get your hands on a belt sander, it makes the process much quicker. Alas, I do not have a belt sander yet, so dremeling was the way I went with it. I also dremeled down the outside edge of the back of the base pizza, so the print wasn't exposed once everything was done and attached. With my crust prepped, it was time to glue. I marked out the inner edge of my crust on the pizza base with a metallic marker. I then heat sealed the pizza base and both crust pieces. I applied contact cement to both sides of my pieces and glued them together. This contact cement I was using had gotten pretty old and was gumming up, but it still worked fine. I applied the top layer of crust the same way. Once my crust pieces were assembled, I used my rotary tool to Dremel the curved shape of the crust. Y'all know I am a sanding queen, so I really enjoyed this part. Anything that requires me to get way too tedious and detail obsessed is 100% my jam. On top of the dremeling, I used sandpaper to hand sand down any irregularities. I know creating something like prop food means that not everything needs to be or should be perfect, but I like to start with a clean base and then add the mess intentionally on top of it. Once my crust shape was good, I went ahead and marked out my lines for my slices. Cut pizza has cut marks in the crust, so I added that with my hot knife. Now comes the insanely ridiculous, disgusting part. Like, I sincerely gagged during parts of this process. It's time to make the sauce and cheese for our pizza. I started by covering the entire pizza with saran wrap and taping that down on the back so I could form my pizza toppings to the exact shape I wanted and have it lay up against the crust naturally. This way, I can glue the cheese on with a more reliable adhesive than just Mod Podge or paper mache glue. You'll see what I mean. I used a couple of different techniques here. Both are disgusting, but one is much less disgusting than the other. You can decide which is worse. The first technique I used was good old paper mache. I consider myself a paper mache specialist, or at least about as much of a cosplay paper mache specialist as you're gonna find. I laid down strips of newspaper and mache mix all over my pizza to get a solid base for adhering things on. I did 2 layers here, letting the first dry completely before adding the other. I also like to paint on a bit of either Mod Podge or just straight paper mache mix before starting to apply the next layer to help more with adhesion. I've mentioned the risk of using paper mache in the past, which is that it can mold. But I will say that I use a very good recipe that keeps it from molding. My oldest paper mache prop is 4 years old without any signs of mold. My recipe is not exact, I kind of just go by how it feels, but this is what I use. Hot water, white glue or Mod Podge, white flour, and a fair amount of salt. The salt is what helps keep it from molding, so do not forget it. I use roughly 2 tablespoons of salt for roughly 2 cups of mache mix. I mix it up really good with a whisk until there's close to no lumps. If your mixture cools while you're using it, that is totally fine. You don't have to reheat it, or at least I don't, and it still works. I formed the sauce ridge by using newspaper formed into little peaks and placed it right up against the crust. I should mention, I left a spot in the center of my pizza without paper mache, so that I had a space for the handle to fit through later. So I'm missing a bit of footage here where I made what I imagine to be the streets of New York City a part of my cosplay. What I did was I took newspaper, I soaked it with paper mache, and I balled it up like an actual disgusting spitball and used it as a base texture on the pizza. If this isn't cursed footage, I don't know what is. I sent pics of this to my friends and they were supportive but equally disturbed by the images that they viewed. I laughed my head off, but trust me, I was really afraid at this point of where the prop was headed. So in fear of creating a monstrosity more horrifying than Man-Fae and Sailor Bubba combined, side note, if you're old enough to get that reference, good on you. I went to Pinterest in search of other techniques similar to paper mache that might give me the cheesy effect I wanted. I came across something called paper fiber mache. The main ingredient? Yeah, that's toilet paper. Basically, what I found is that if you break down the fibers in toilet paper by dissolving it in hot water and then mix it in with glue and salt to create something like paper clay. If you can imagine the smell of hot water, toilet paper, already existing paper mache mix, and white glue swirling together in your nostrils, well, let's just say it's a symphony of scents, but the orchestra was all drunk and had never rehearsed together. Anyway, I covered my pizza with a layer of that, letting some of the papier-mâché newspaper balls peek through to what was somehow a really good texture. I ended up mostly using my hands here because, you know, professionalism. I made sure to bring some of the cheese up onto the crust as well. And before it dried, I pushed lines into it with the end of a paintbrush to show the slice marks through the cheese. I had to let that dry for quite a while, about 48 hours because it was so thick, and then I came back in with sandpaper to grit up the texture even more. Somehow, the smell had become even worse, but there was no turning back, especially because this was about where it started to be less nightmarish. I carefully peeled the saran wrap off of the underside of my cheese and propped the pizza up to get some natural airflow to the underside. I do want to say that it's been about 3-4 months since I made this prop, and it's still in good condition. It doesn't have a smell. It's got no signs of molding, so I would say experiment success here, I guess. With everything 100% dry, I attached the cheese to the pizza crust base using spray adhesive. I also made these super simple pepperoni slices out of 2mm craft foam. I attached them using hot glue, which I now realized was probably a mistake, and I should have waited until after the pizza was painted the pepperoni separately, and then applied them afterwards. But, oh well, some of them did come off during the painting process, and I just re-glued them on afterwards. I used Quick Seal to help blend the texture of the cheese onto the crust even more. I did this by applying it and not smoothing it out, using it mostly for texture, and I'm actually really happy with the effect. Finally, the pizza was ready to go in the oven. Unfortunately, I may have left it a bit too long. Just kidding. This is Plasti Dip, but it made me laugh to see a blackened pizza. This build really was a ton of fun. Plasti Dip gave me an evenly primed base to paint on top of. I used a lot of custom mixes of acrylic paint here. You don't need any special paints. I have a huge stock that I've just built up over the years, so rarely do I have to go out and buy more acrylic. When I custom mix paints for a project, I like to keep them in small reusable containers so they don't dry out. If you hang on to things like little margarine tubs, you can use that as well. You don't have to go out and buy specific containers for your paint. But remixing a paint can be a pain, and having little containers like this help out a lot. I started by applying base colors for each section. A dark red for my pepperonis and sauce. I made a golden cream color with some white and buttercup. And my crust started with a warm reddish brown base. From here on out, I just built on the color, adding shading and highlights where necessary. I added more yellow on my cheese to give some coloring like cheese grease. And you know me, I definitely got plenty of finger painting in here. I felt the crust didn't have enough texture to it, like I wanted it to look like we had some seasoning sprinkled on there, so I used an acrylic molding paste, specifically the Golden brand pumice gel, to add to it. Then I had to paint over that again, but it was worth it. The pepperonis were by far the hardest part of this pizza to paint, and I still don't know if I'm totally happy with them. I guess the texture of processed meat is just really hard to capture with craft foam and acrylic paint. Once I was finally happy with my fake pizza, I had to grease that baby up with a lot of glossy acrylic clear coat. I probably put 4 or 5 coats on, making sure each one had time to dry before applying the next. Moving on to the base of my pizza, the large base of my pizza spinner was 28 inches in diameter. I marked this out with a ruler and tape measure, similar to how I measured the pizza. I found the center of the board, traced the Lazy Susan bearing exactly where I wanted it in the center. I also needed a small circle for the pizza to sit on that would connect both sides of the Lazy Susan bearing. This smaller wood circle was 20 inches in diameter. I marked the bearing placement on this as well. The wood that I used for my base is oak plywood, which I got a big sheet of it for about 30 bucks at the hardware store, and I did not use all of it. I also used a 6-inch in diameter Lazy Susan bearing, which was less than $5. I had a package of number 8 1/2-inch zinc plated wood screws, which were less than $1. Piece of PVC pipe, 2 end caps for that, a flange to help hold my handle against the wood, and then I also used a borrowed jigsaw. My husband and cosplay partner, Aaron, was able to operate the jigsaw to cut the circles out for this project. We borrowed the jigsaw, so there was no extra cost for us in using it, keeping with the budget-friendly theme for the cosplay. We also used a drill to carve out the hole in the center for the handle to fit through, and used the jigsaw to cut the rest of the hole. I might mention this was the first time we used a jigsaw, so we probably did this wrong or something, but hey, it worked and no one got hurt. I'd suggest asking someone who actually knows what they're doing when using power tools for the first time. I used my rotary tool to sand the holes out to make sure the PVC pipe for the handle would fit. I used sandpaper to clean up and smooth out the outside edges. With my edges smooth, I used white Plasti Dip to coat the base. I had this Plasti Dip on hand, but no white spray paint, so I went against what I would usually do, and I left the Plasti Dip without paint on top, which was fine for this project. I left the smaller 20-inch wood circle unpainted, as it would be hidden under the pizza. For my handle, I used contact cement to put the pieces together. I roughed up the PVC pipe to give it a bit more of a way to grip with the contact cement, and I did this inside of the flange as well. I then glued all my pieces together using contact cement, and I used a piece of scrap foam to help apply the adhesive evenly. I don't have footage of us installing the ball bearing, but I will leave a link below to the video that I used for reference. It was tricky and would have been really hard to film. For one, the instructions on the package weren't super clear, which made it even harder. But on Lazy Susan ball bearings, there are small holes that you actually drill on, and large holes that I think are just there to confuse you. It got figured out though, and otherwise went smoothly. Because the flange has such large holes, probably for when you're like doing what you're supposed to do with it in using it for plumbing, I don't know, we drilled new holes that would hold our screws in place. I don't remember what screws we used on this part. We found them, so yay saving money. But they were much longer than the 1/2-inch wood screws we used with the Lazy Susan bearing. I screwed my end caps on the PVC handle, and the majority of the build was done. Finally, I marked the 20-inch diameter circle on the back of my pizza and used contact cement to glue it onto that base. No pizza is complete without a little pizza table. I couldn't manage to find one that was as big and perfect as I wanted from like any pizza shops, so I had to make my own. I started with 2mm EVA foam and cut 2 circles out, using one for the rim of the pizza table. I simply used hot glue to put them together. I went a little extra and dremelled the foam edge into a smooth bevel. I heat sealed my foam and then covered it with Fibra that I already had on hand from a previous project to help keep the table durable. Fibra can be quite prone to air bubbles, more so than Worbla, so I wouldn't usually use it to cover things with, but since it's what I had on hand, I made it work. I made little legs for my table using super thin dowels that I also had in my stock. I made the little pizza table while in the middle of constructing both the pizza and the base, so I wasn't sure exactly how long the legs should be. Because of this, I held off finishing it until I had everything else done. I did have to cut the legs just a tiny bit shorter to keep them from hitting the pizza, but otherwise I coated the legs with Fibra, then painted directly on top with white acrylic and a little gray acrylic for shading. I attached the pizza table with contact cement and a little Fibra melted onto the PVC caps. So far, it has held up fine. Overall, this was an insanely fun build. I love wearing this cosplay, and I always get compliments on the pizza.
Hopefully this video was interesting and helpful to you. I know not everybody's out there building giant fake pizza or food props, but hopefully there's some techniques in this video that you can take and apply to your cosplays. I'm making like 5 different cosplays for contests in the next 6 months, so I'm gonna do my best to balance that along with uploading. I have a whole schedule of videos to edit and upload, so let's just hope I can keep up with that. Regardless, if you're ever struggling with the build, remember that you can always DM me on Instagram where I'm most active, and I will do my absolute best to help you figure out your problem and get that cosplay made. Please go ahead and hit that like button as it helps me grow my channel and reach more cosplayers like you. Leave a comment down below and let me know what you thought of this video. And remember to subscribe for more cosplay content in the future.